here. So welcome to everybody today. It's been really wonderful, this whole series. And let me just say where we are in terms of our webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about the changing role of the manager. And this really is a part of the whole pandemic webinar series, as we're now grandly calling it, which actually, lovely autumn evening in Sydney. Oh, yeah, get out to that barbecue. Yes. Sorry, I'm always, as always, distracted by the chat. So we actually started, if you remember, March of last year with our first webinar. And in fact, if you go through the titles of the webinars, you can sort of see it's those, some of you know I kept a diary. Oh goodness, where am I now? I'm on volume 9 of my diary. I didn't think it was going to get to 9 volumes, but it is. But actually this in fact traces the journey we've been through, families, well-being. You know, we worried about networks and collaboration. We wondered about what it would mean for leaders. Embracing the new reality, we began to realize that things were going to be different. Co-creating, you can see how we were moving then to thinking about how we're actually going to make it work. New skills for new realities, building resilience. And during that time, of course, we did a lot of work, certainly on hybrid working. And I've written an article which Andrew very sweetly mentioned in the Financial Times last week, which is coming out in the Harvard Business Review next month, actually, in fact, this month, so, well, April. So if you're interested in that, do keep in touch with us, because we are really becoming the leading advisory group on hybrid work. We're working with some of you all over the world and lots of other companies all over the world on this issue of hybrid. But what I want to talk about today is what it means for managers. And we have another, our next one, by the way, is on the 27th of April. Hope you can join us for that as well, which is leading through uncertainty. But actually what we're beginning at HSM to really focus on is the emerging reality. You know, really, what is it that we've lost? What is it we've gained? Where do we want to be? And in terms of that, most of my work has been focused on hybrid work, which is why the Harvard Business Review article really summarizes our views on hybrid work. But I want to slightly change the focus today, whilst we're all together as a group, and really think about what does it mean for managers. Because one of the things we try to do at HSM, and one of the things I try to do, hi Joe, yes, we can send you the FT article. Lovely piece actually by Andrew on that. But one of the things I think we've now got to talk about is what does it mean for managers? Now, sometimes when I do a webinar, you hear me at the end of my thinking. So sometimes when I do a webinar like this, I've already sort of worked it all through and I'm presenting it to you. But that's not really the case today. This is what I would call much more of a research webinar, because I really want to also listen to what you've got to say, because I'm sort of in the middle of writing what I hope will be another HBR article, which won't come out till much later on in the year, which is about what does this mean for managers. So that's really what the focus of today is going to be about. But I'd like you also to think really hard about it. I've had some thoughts and I want to share those with you, but this is very much a research seminar. So let's all engage with that. Oh, people are from everywhere: Hong Kong, the Philippines, Egypt. Wow, isn't this wonderful? Romania, yeah, great. Bahrain, yes, it's always hot in Bahrain. Okay, managers have always been important. And really that's where I want to sort of start today's conversation, is really to say, what's going to become of the role of managers? And that's what I want to focus on as we move into that new reality, which I think I've called hybrid. And I think, honestly, that's the word that we're going to be using moving forward. Let's start by really getting you involved with what it is to be a manager. Some of you are managers, some of you manage managers. So by managers, I mean people who manage other people or people who manage projects. And I wanted, first of all, to ask you, how would you describe the everyday experience of being a manager now? So those of you who are managers or who have seen people managing, how would you describe their everyday experience? And this is a Menti for those of you who haven't used Menti. It's great, really, but it can be a bit annoying. So if you go to www.menti.com, so just put that into your iPhone or whatever it is you're using. And the code is, you can see it up here, 132. I think we're also going to put it into the chat, aren't we? So do you want to, should we do that, Lottie? Let's put this in the chat. Oh, you're already there. 132. Oh, I don't even need to bother. Oh, yeah, parent-child when done badly. That's an interesting point. That comes back to a piece that I've been writing about for years, actually, which is about, I wrote a book called The Democratic Enterprise, which I think only me, my mother, and Andrew Hill read. I don't think anybody else read that book called The Democratic Enterprise. And what I did there is I just sort of said that the relationship between individuals and their organizations is changing from parent-child to adult. And of course, the interesting thing about being an adult is it's got responsibilities associated with it. So that's a really interesting point, is that you think that's a sort of regression, really, isn't it? Is it's regressing to sort of parent-child? I'd like to hear a bit more about that. Juggling, of course, juggling, exhaustion, lots of meetings, lots of words around exhaustion, stressful, disconnect, oh, okay, demanding. So actually, really, plate spinning, nobody's feeling great about this. So perhaps we were right. Perhaps we were right to bring this in as something for the confusing. Yes, confusing, challenging, thankless. Oh, wow. Oh, these are great words. Thank you for this. Never ending, exhausting. Lots of you have used the word exhaustion. Mentally and emotionally exhausting, tiring. But also a couple of you are talking about the transitions that managers need to make. And actually that's sort of part of what I wanted to talk about today, really, is what should we transition to? So I would say that the words that you're using are all negative words. I mean, if we were to run a sort of dynamics on these, James, you might want to do that. I think you'll notice that they're almost all negative words. Yeah, trying, pressures, listening to complaints. Wow, I hadn't quite expected these to be so negative, actually. So it's good that we're talking about this now, and it really shows that this is something we need to do something about. I was on a call last week with one of the senior people, in fact, the person who runs Manpower in North America, and she was telling me that when they look at recruitment, they think that about 40% of people are looking for new jobs at the moment. So, that's a big deal. And, if you feel that this is what your job's about, then you're going to be seeing if there's a way out of this. So I think it's really, really important. Now, amongst that, there's also some good points that you've made. One is that you've said, look, I really think it's a transition that we're facing. And another one is you're saying, well, actually, we are learning a lot. And in a way, that's sort of what I'd like us to focus on today, that these are really tough moments for managers, but it might be an opportunity for us to learn, and it might be an opportunity for us to transition. So thank you so much for that start. So although we're all sitting in lovely, bright places, nevertheless, many of us are either seeing our managers or experiencing ourselves pretty negative feelings. Now, let me just tell you what I've been doing in terms of this research. I've been partnering with my friend Diane Gerson, who some of you may know. She's one of the sort of senior HR folk in the world. She was former global CHRO for IBM. I know Diane because she serves with me on the board as a fellow of the American Human Resource Institute, which is a sort of the American HR group. Some of you I know are from the States. And also just been made a fellow of the Harvard Business School. So Diane and I have been working on this for a bit of time now. And what I'm doing, in a sense, is sharing where we are with our thinking. She and I had an interview last week to talk about this. She's not on the webinar today because she's in California and it's right in the middle of the night. This webinar was timed for our Australian friends, not our Californian friends. So Diana isn't with us, but you'll find when we send you all the information from today, that there's also a link, so you can hear she and I in conversation. And do take a look at that link, actually, because she's a wonderful person. So let me just basically put all of this into context. So when we think about all the words that you've used, actually the truth is, from the 1940s on, when people started to look at managers, they were already saying, oh my God, they've got no time at all. So in 1940, which was really the first sort of study of what a manager does, and it was a study where somebody watched managers, and what they found is, they said, and this is quotes from the 1940 studies, they barely get 23 minutes without an interruption. My goodness, we'd be pleased these days to get 23 minutes, wouldn't we? But then Mintzberg came along, Henry Mintzberg, who some of you may know, and he also began to describe how highly, well, Henry wasn't in 1965, by the way, he would have only been young by then. But the next group said it's highly fragmented. And this is how Henry Mintzberg, when he did his diary work on managers, this is how he described it in 1973. He said, it's an unrelenting pace, there's many interruptions, and it's an action by nature. So really, I guess what I'm saying at the moment is that we've got the pandemic on top, which has added all the exhaustion, but the manager's job was always going to be a very difficult job. And if you take a look, and this is really what Diane and I have been doing, to say, well, what is the job? If you take a look at all the research that's been done on managers, then as you can see, generally 3 clusters of activities emerge. And by the way, please use the chat to bring in any ideas you've got or any thoughts you have, because we'd like to get back to any of you who have exciting ideas or thoughts to see if we can boost the ideas that we've got at the moment about the role of the manager. So I think that there's sort of 3 clusters of tasks that have come in from almost all sort of analytics of what managers do. The first is that they manage people. And certainly at the beginning, if we look back to the 1940s and even 1960s, that was really cascading information. So a large part of the manager's job was to tell people information that they were receiving within a hierarchy. They also then did budgets and resources, and they did hiring and firing of people. So that was very much the mechanics of supporting people. They also managed outcomes in terms of managing performance outcomes, managing rewards and recognition for the people who reported to them, salary increases, promotions, team building. But then there was a 3rd cluster of tasks, which were about attrition, really, which became very much a risk assessment role, well-being, network broker, so actually introducing people to each other, and upskilling and reskilling people. So those were the 3 fundamental clusters that made up the manager's role. But actually from about the 1970s onwards, a whole bunch of transformational activities took place that fundamentally changed the role of the manager. So I just wanted to, okay, I'm just going to take a look at the chat, Nikki. Okay, so Nikki, you're already preempting what I'm about to say, which is that you've also seen those transitions. So when Diane and I looked at those, we've actually put them into 4 waves. So part of our research is looking more actively at what those waves were when they took place. And by the way, this actually comes from Diane's work at IBM. So when she looks back at IBM, who of course are a technology company, so they're going to be probably slightly further ahead than other companies that aren't in the tech space. But nevertheless, what she's seen, and we've now tested this out with many other companies, is 4 waves, the fourth being where we are at the moment, by the way. So the first wave would be process re-engineering. And you'll remember process re-engineering, where companies began to change the nature of the hierarchies and to actually say, could we could we re-engineer our processes so that they're more related to each other? So rather than processes going down, what process re-engineering started to do was to look at them across. And so managers were part of that process. So some of their roles were taken away from them. And that was problematic until we had introduction of digital technologies. And in fact, those waves have continued. So it's not as if, we've stopped. In fact, if anything, the digital technology has played a very important role in taking away some of the managers' jobs. So for those of you who are doing quite a lot of work in digital technologies, if you just want to put into the chat what it is you've done, then that would be really interesting. But basically what digital technologies did was to digitalize much of the work of the manager. So if we take a look at those 4 boxes again, particularly the first became highly digitalized. So bots, chatbots, artificial intelligence, all of these digital mechanisms, technologies, took away from the manager some of what was overwhelming them. So now a chatbot could talk to their employee about what was happening. Self-service meant that people could do stuff themselves. They had access to information about their salaries and so on. The manager didn't necessarily have to do it for them. And so what you began to see with regard to digital technologies is the manager, with regard to the cascade of information, was playing less of a role, and the digital technologies was doing that for them. And as a consequence of that, of course, you said, well, in that case, let's ask the manager to manage more people. So I'm just going to spend a moment just asking you to reflect on that digital technology wave and just put into the, if you could just put into the chat anything that you're doing with regard to digital technologies that have changed the role of the manager. So I'm just going to wait a moment and just hear some of the things that you are saying about that, about digital. So Louisa says, we did a lot on learning technologies. Yes, I remember that. I know some of you are in companies that I know have very good platforms to train people. So some of the upskilling areas of the job then became part of that. Lots of HR self-service, but lots of concerns about that. Puts a lot of stress, worried about the integrity of it. People dashboards, removal approvals for leads. So basically part of the role of the manager, which was to actually make policy happen, that was now happening. Lots of you are saying that the way that you really use digital was to curate learning programs. That's very interesting, thank you. Some of you were doing induction, was developing online. The recruitment processes were going digital. But lots of you are also saying they're not working as well as we thought. Automated onboarding, yes. Pulse surveys were giving managers data about what was happening. Microsoft Teams, of course, all of this, meeting presentations, educate, manage, and so on. That's very helpful. Thank you for all of that. The next piece that came along, so digital continued to happen, and of course, hybrid has really accentuated that. But the next wave that came along was agile working. Now, I know a number of you have absolutely um, uh, said this is the way we want to work, and some of the companies in today are real proponents of agile working, particularly the professional service firms. So agile working, where you moved from managing pieces of tasks to managing whole projects. So you really continued to push that those horizontal, those lateral flows along in terms of agile working. Uh, and you were then assigning people to projects so that the manager then in agile working was either a coach or they were a sort of scrum leader themselves. So again, let's take a pause and ask you something about agile working. Those of you who have moved to agile working, and I know that there's a couple of you on the line which have really embraced agile working. If you could say what the company is that's really helpful as well. So let's spend a moment just thinking about the impact that agile working had on the role of the manager. So those of you who are working in agile. So can you say where you're from? Oh, this is Telstra. Okay. So Nikki are you, yeah. Nikki, if you're from, yeah. So we're already getting some of the great agile workers. So Telstra, I'm going to talk about later because we're using Telstra as one of our cases. So Telstra has moved completely to agile. Telstra, for those of you in Australia know, one of the Asian large telecoms, perhaps not so well known in Europe, but doing some incredible work. Ram from TCS, of course, has always moved to agile. Nikki, you're saying the Prudential is moving to agile. So you're beginning to see how agile is taking off, but also some interesting points about that. So at Swift, so basically what agile is doing is it's beginning to separate the role of the leader. And I'm going to talk about Telstra in a moment because that's so Assad, you're doing it for the revenue in New South Wales. Vicky, you're agile in full Scrum at Standard Charter, Scrum Masters, squads, tribes, sprints. So some of you like Standard Charter. Vicky, that's really interesting. We'd love to hear more about that. We'll contact you separately on that. So Julia, you sent a document. I don't know what that is, but would be interesting to hear. So splitting the role of the leader and sort of double helix, which is split capability and work. So you can see that everybody's trying to solve this problem. And then along came hybrid work, which is only just beginning to play out. So let me just stop for a moment and ask ourselves, where are we then with this journey? So we know from the 1940s onwards that that the work of the manager was a really difficult job. We know from how you talk about it right now that it's still very difficult. But having said that, all sorts of activities have been put in place to try and make that job, okay, no problem, Julia, to try and make that job a better job. So process reengineering, digital technologies, which actually digitalize quite a lot of the job of the manager, agile working, which changed the processes. I mean, in a sense, agile working was the final chapter of process reengineering. And now we've got hybrid work. So let's just spend a moment reflecting on, well, where are we now in terms of that? And I want to just take a look at the next slide on that. And really talk about where we are now. So if we were to write the wave now of hybrid work, what is it that's currently happening in terms of hybrid work? So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to do our second cloud, which is around what impact will and has hybrid work had on the job of managing? And these are the four areas that I can see already emerging from the work that we're doing with you, from the research that I'm picking up from my academic colleagues around the world, and indeed in my conversations. Okay, so as KPMG has done a lot, the professional service firms were the first in with agile working, actually. But sorry, no, the telecoms probably. I think Ram, you would say TCS moved into agile really quickly. But this is where I think we are now. So I'd be very interested in a moment with the cloud for your comments about this. So we're going to move into the cloud for this part of the conversation. The first was, I don't think we've got to the end result with hybrid. My view currently, and HSM is advising a whole bunch of companies about hybrid, and we've got the HBR article coming out later on in April. I think this is a journey. So the first point to say about the role of the manager is, I don't think we yet know how you manage hybrid work. And what we're seeing in the companies that we're close to is a real emphasis now on experimentation. So it'll be interesting in either the chat or in the cloud, which I'm going to open up in a moment, to hear more about where you are in terms of experimentation. The second issue I think about managing right now in terms of hybrid work is really deep issues of fairness and equity. When we started our journey on hybrid work, and you'll see that we've got a whole bunch of webinars that really, if you go back and look at them over time, you'll see the evolution of our understanding of hybrid work. What came out at the very beginning was issues around fairness and equity. Equity in terms of the fact that not everybody could work wherever they wanted to, and whenever they wanted to, in terms of place and time. And some of you have already heard, you know, one of my sons, Dominic, is working on A&E. He's an A&E doctor. Well, he can't work from home. The guys who just picked up my rubbish an hour ago can't work from home. I can see there's a number of you, Mars, for example, is on the call today. Half of your people are in factories. They can't work from home. Well, that's not really fair. But so that's a question of how do you manage completely different types of workforce. The second is fairness even within your own people who can work hybrid. So if some of the companies we're working with have said to the managers, well, you know, get on and do this yourself. You decide who's going to come into the office, who's going to stay at home. That's going to lead to huge issues around fairness because managers are going to do it differently. So I think that there's really interesting issues about fairness and equity that are arising. The third is about incredibly complex scheduling. Now, my guess is that you're going to see a real push with digitalization. And I know, Ram, you're here from TCS on the call today. And TCS have already got very, very good scheduling processes, technologies in place. I know Fujitsu is on the call today from Japan. Welcome. And I start the Harvard Business Review article with the case of Fujitsu, who are using technology to schedule both people and space. So when you think about scheduling, it's people, office space, and projects. You know, the last thing that you want is for everybody to say, I'd like to come into the office 2 or 3 days a week, and that will be Wednesday and Thursday. You can't have that. So you're going to have to schedule that. And whose job is that? Well, that's the manager's job. So you're going to have very quickly to move into some extraordinarily complex scheduling. And my guess is that many of you, some of you, are going to be using technology to do that. One of the ways that we predict the future of work is we look at where venture capital money is being spent. And we just did that just a week ago, just looked at companies that look at venture capital spend. And it's a lot of money is currently going into startups that will do virtual stuff like we're doing now better, but also scheduling. So it would be really interesting. Yeah, so Nikki says we're just using technology. We're not even asking managers to get involved in that. But nevertheless, the manager will have to think about the principles. So if you take a look at the work that we're doing on hybrid work, and we'll send you some information about that in the next week or two, but you'll see that our model at the center of it has principles. I think many of you are going to use technology, but nevertheless, some question about what the principles. And finally, part of the role of the manager in hybrid work is going to be information and knowledge sharing. So that's where I think we are in terms of the impact. But let me ask you what you see as the impact. So we're going to move into our second mentee question. And the question here is, what do you see as as changing? So as many of you are sort of scrabbling around, trying to think about what should the manager do, what do you see as some of the major changes? If you could put that in the cloud, that would be great. And Lottie's put in the code for you. So what do you think the manager's going to be doing post-COVID? So more communication, more coaching, more communication, the whole of life support coaching. Okay, so this is that we're dreaming here, aren't we? Coaching, reporting, career coach, looking at vulnerabilities, more admin, managing others' output, reporting in, balancing productivity and well-being. Yes, I think that's really important. Coordinating teams, coaching, well-being, skills, building trust, facilitating, succession planning, coaching again, coaching, balancing, job redesign. That's really interesting, actually. Navigating ambiguity. Some great comments here. Thank you. We'll obviously look at all of these in detail. And keep you posted on where we go with this, adult to adult, so not parent-child. So I guess, this is wonderful stuff. Thank you for everybody. We've got more than 200 people on the call today, so there's a lot here, a lot to think about. So quite a number of you talked about coaching, well-being, ambiguity. Okay. So this is great, thanks. I think that's very, very helpful. So look, the point, here's the cynic in me. The first word cloud I asked you to look at was how does it feel now? And the words you used were overwhelmingly exhausted. And the words that you're using now are overwhelmingly coaching. So the point I want to ask is, why would this happen? If you're managed, this is exactly our point. This is why I'm so excited about this piece of work, actually, because, if we say that it's all terrible at the moment, but actually there's this sort of nirvana, a bit like Derwent water on a sunny day, how are we going to get to these high aspirations of managers spending all their time coaching? And so that's the question really that I want to address in my research. Exactly the point that we've come up with today. Now, thanks for that. That's really wonderful. Let's just take a look at the next piece, which is, here's my concern. I mean, I hadn't predicted, by the way, because that these two clouds would be so obviously different, but it is astounding, isn't it? That right now you're saying we're completely exhausted, and then suddenly you're saying, so thanks Conrad. Suddenly you're saying, well, actually, everything's going to be great. We're going to do all of this, facilitation. We're going to be championing employees. We're going to be looking for inclusion and diversity. We're going to help with mental health. We're going to help them on board. We're going to coach them. Except we're going to be great at having difficult conversations. I'm calling that the invisible thread, because it seems to me that when you look at the great managers, this is what they do. By the way, if you've got any data on this, we would love to have it. TCS, Ram, I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do. We talked to Ashok Ashok taught my program, and he was saying that you've got real clear evidence that people in teams right now who are the happiest have managers who do the invisible thread. You've actually got data on that. If anyone else has got data, please put it in the chat, send me an email. We are desperate for data that show that managers now who do this get better results, okay? But this is the invisible thread. And my worry is that when we go out of hybrid, get into hybrid, we're not going to go to the sunny uphills that you described in the word cloud 2, which is everybody's coaching, but we actually get to a place which looks remarkably like what you talked about in cloud 1, which is massive frustration, exhaustion. So here's my next and final cloud. This is actually word cloud 3, although we've called it word cloud 2. Let's take a look at the next word cloud, please. So my interest is not just in the invisible thread. I think this is probably the wrong question looking at it. Can I change that? Not so much to the invisible thread. And perhaps Lottie, could you put the question in the chat now that I'm sort of in it? I think the question more is, how do we allow managers to do the invisible thread? I think it's a question of how rather than giving examples. I think we sort of know what they do. So Lottie, could you just remind people in the chat that this Menti question isn't so much what the examples are, but what are the practices and processes by which you actually allow managers to do the invisible thread. So sorry, it's a slightly different, I've changed it around so we need to value and reward them. We need to build empathy. Redesign the roles. We need to so quite a lot of you are talking about the redesigning the roles, creating different KPIs. Quite a bit is about redesign, but how do we give them headspace? So again, if we could just continue in the Menti at the moment, those of you who said, let's give them headspace, of course, that's what we've got to do, but we've never been able to do that. Managers have never had headspace. How do we give them headspace? How do we give them headspace? Clarity of roles, empower, but how do we empower them? What does empowerment actually, you see, words like culture, I'm not accepting that as a, let's pretend I'm in one of my MBA classes at the moment, that culture, that's the outcome. What would we actually do? Okay, use 360 feedback, that's interesting. Yeah, that's nice. What else? Role modeling, yes, that's specific. What else? Training. Okay, Simonic, if any of you are doing really interesting training, can you put it in the free up their time? So how do we do it? How do we free up their time? Okay, smaller teams, that's interesting. Okay, some great examples. Thank you for that. So if any of you have got really good examples of what your managers do, yes, okay, this is very interesting. Thank you. Only a few of you have talked about training. Simonique, you've mentioned it in the chat. Is anybody doing anything more on training? Use more data? Yeah, I think that's right. So one of the questions is, what data are you using? Again, I'm being a professor here. Specifically, what's the data? Andrew, it's from you. Remember it from being trained as a journalist. What's the name of the dog? We teach a thriving course. Let's hear more about that. Thank you. So, okay, MJ, yeah, leadership labs. These are great examples of training. We're going to come back to you on that. Yeah, I know, Sarah, you do lots of training, but workload still gets in the way. Okay, this is very, very helpful. So thank you for that. We need to help people to prioritize time. Okay, this is just great. So let me move to 3 ideas to reflect on. So this is really where I am and where Diane and I am with our thinking. Number 1, redesign the jobs. As a number of you have said that, Telstra has done a really fascinating role in that. And actually, Diane and I have written this up as a case. You put them, yeah, thank you, thanks for that. So what Telstra have done is they've absolutely completely separate. They've gone agile and they've completely separated the role of the people managers from work managers. People managers only manage the people aspects of the role, and work managers manages the projects. Having said that, managers have a very high span of control. So people managers have a lot of people reporting to them. I think we have some people from Telstra on the line. It would be interesting to hear that. So that's my first idea. Second idea, innovate how we judge managers. And again, I can see you've come to some of the same conclusions, and that's in terms of employee experience. But this is data here. We need to collect data that really shows which managers are doing these sorts of the people part, the invisible thread, and actually reward them for it. But to reward them for it, we need data. So data on employee experience, data on inclusion, data on career velocity. Are they helping people to build their careers? Data on employee engagement, data on the teams that they're building. So like you, I think, actually judging managers by that is going to be really important, but we need data to be able to do that, real data. And my third idea is about upskilling. I think one of the reasons, and again, this comes from the conversations Dan and I have had with some companies across the world on why don't managers do the invisible thread? Well, they don't do the invisible thread because they can't. And that's partly, in some cases, because they're not capable of doing it. But in quite a lot of cases, it's because they don't know how to do it. So the third idea that I've got is about upskilling managers in this invisible thread. Now, how might we do that? Well, here's 3 ideas, and I can see from the word cloud that a number of you talked about that. And when we come to look at everything that's come out of this, then that will be very helpful. But here's a few ideas. Firstly, really thinking about social capital and networks, really helping managers understand what social capital is, how they need to be creating social capital, and maybe both measuring their social capital, both in terms of the networks around them, but also helping them realize what social capital is. So anyone who's doing any work on helping managers understand the power of the networks they create, please drop a note to us, either in the chat, that would be great, and we'll come back to you on that. The second is crafting the job for learning. And actually I feel, and you've perhaps heard, if you've been on my webinars before or read any of my books or articles, you'll know that one of the pieces I feel is that we haven't thought enough about job design. We've tended to bring in practices and processes to reinforce behavior. But what we haven't done enough of, I don't think, is to go back to the design of the job, how they spend their time, their objectives, who they interact with, and to say, could we craft that so people can learn more? And I think Telstra is a really good example of crafting the job of the people manager so they actually can learn more about how to do it. Now, a number of you have said, well, let's use coaching to help managers, but very few companies can afford to have managers in one-to-one coaching. So one of the questions I'd like you to think about is, how have you been able to do that at scale? And thirdly, how do we upskill managers so that they realize that the invisible thread is what helps them to become part of the leadership cohort? Because what we know very much about leaders right now is just how much they are using these coaching and skills to really work. So I'm going to, you can see where my thinking is going on that now. Lots of fantastic examples here. And just to say that, as you know, it takes me about a year to build up this idea. So I'm unusually asking you for your ideas sort of halfway through this research project rather than at the end. So I'm going to come back to those of you who have talked here in the chat to ask you to think more about this. So happy to have you as part of our Reinventing Management research group if you're interested. So let's open up for questions.
Thanks, Lynda. And as Lynda said, some fantastic comments in the chat. So thank you very much all for sharing your thoughts. So the two word clouds at the start, Lynda, that you mentioned, that were very different around the stress that people are having right now versus the utopian ideal they want to in the future. And there was a lot around, in a way, humanizing the role of a manager, certainly in that second word cloud, rather than focusing on them being efficient and producing work. And so I think this ties in very well to a comment we had around motivating managers. So if we're changing that role of the manager, we're trying to bring in more of those human elements, what would your advice be around how to motivate managers within organizations?
Well, I don't, honestly, Anna, I don't know the answer to that right now. And that's part of the reason we're having this as a research conversation. I think, as I said, the three areas that I'm currently looking at in terms of what you might do with your managers right now is, one of them is take a look at reframing their job so that you take away some of those, the project management part of their jobs. And I think that Telstra is a really good example of what they're doing on that. And those of you who are members of FO, Future of Work Consortium, as some of you are, do the next workshop we have, the next masterclass we have on people experience. We'll be hearing more about what Telstra is doing in terms of people experience. So we can see that actually changing the dynamics of the job is going to really help. We can see that changing the metrics is going to really help. And we can see that putting in, upskilling and reskilling is going to really help. So I think, Anna, as always, it's really, it's a combination. And those of you who know the way I think know that I'm a systems thinker. So it isn't going to be just about doing one of these things. It's actually going to be about doing all of them together. If you only do, for example, those of you, actually, that's a good point. We need to think about that as a system. You've got to do all of them. Because if you only do a bit of it, like, for example, you say, we're going to do more upskilling, then all you're doing is adding more on top of a job which is already stretching people. So you've also, if you're going to put more in, you've also got to take stuff out. So it's actually not just putting in, it's taking out. So let's just take a look. Any questions? So do put your hand up if you have a question. Oh, this is Andrew. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Lynda. And there was a question around the question of social capital that you mentioned in the presentation from Nikki Rose. And Nikki, I don't know if you'd like to turn on your camera and ask your question around social capital and upskilling.
Yeah, because Nikki, you've been very active in the chat, so I'd love to. Are you around? Nikki, where are you here? You've been very active.
Yes, I think so. I'm just trying. Hopefully you can see me. I've just hi.
Tell us who you are, because we've seen a lot of you in the chat. For those
okay. My name's Nikki. Yeah, I'm Nikki Rose. I'm from Brisbane, Australia. I work for Telstra, so I work for Alex, who you spoke to last week, I believe, Lynda. And actually I am, so when we split the work, you know, the role of the leader, so looking after people, my job is the chapter area lead. So I look after all the people who look after the people report to me, if that makes sense. So the capability is that I for the social capital, I'm really interested to understand a little bit more about what that is, how you define it, and how you teach it or measure it, that sort of element. Anything more you can share on that?
Yeah. Well, I think, Nikki, that's a really interesting question. You know, I run a one-week program at London Business School. Some of you have been on it, actually, about sort of human resource strategy. Actually, it's coming in virtual next time. So if you want to, and I also run a 3-day program at London. I also run anyway, whatever. What I notice on that is that of all the things that HR people do, the thing they know least about is social capital. So Nikki, you're right to bring that up. So I actually teach a lot about social capital in that program. In fact, I get one of our faculty who is a network theorist to talk about that. And by what I mean by social capital is the value that's held in networks. And so part of the new role of the manager is to make those connections. I mean, Diane and I were talking about that. And she said, you know, when she was at IBM, the very best managers knew how to connect people to each other. So like they'd say, you know, you really need a bit more of this sort of skill. And I know that in this part of the organization, there's somebody who can help you. So let me manage that connection. So the bridging is really important. You know, so how you actually bridge across networks is very important. I don't think we teach managers or HR folk, by the way, enough about social capital. And I think that because of that, we just think it's about, oh, you know, being nice to people and building relationships. It really isn't. It's really about, you know, strong networks, weak networks, making those connections. So Nikki, thanks for that. I mean, are you doing anything in Telstra with regard to that?
Yeah, I think the thing that we do, so because we're working in Agile, I think the thing that jumps to mind as you're talking about that, Lynda, is we actually allocate resources each quarter based on the work. And so one of the most satisfying parts of my job is being able to understand from everyone in my chapter different types of work they want to work on for their career or their learning, and then being able to connect them and move them to that dynamically each quarter, rather than having to move jobs and those sort of elements. And so that happens.
Thanks, Nikki. And I'm conscious that we're running out of time, but you know, one thing I want to really take from what you've said is that what we've underestimated is the job itself. You know, not all the sort of other, but actually the tasks that people work on. And part of the role of the manager is to understand what tasks are most likely to help somebody grow. And, you know, I think that's, we haven't really thought enough about that. Beth, thank you. Sorry, I'm conscious we're 3 minutes before we close. And for our Australian friends, they're ready to get that prawn on the barbie. So I don't want to get between a prawn and a barbie at 8 o'clock at night in Australia, or 7, I think. Oh, it's 8 now, in fact, yeah. So Beth, you've also, so a number of people have talked about social capital. Keep in touch with HSM and me about that, because it is a really important point. And Andrew, I know that you've talked in your columns quite a bit about social capital. I don't think people understand enough about it. I know there's lots of books about networking and so on, but Andrew, what's really interesting is how little impact those books on networking have had on managers. You know, it's anyway. So making those connections and then understanding the value. So I'm going to move finally into my last moment. Just first of all, to say thank you to everybody for being part of this great conversation. I know we could actually sit for another hour, couldn't we, talking about this. But this is very much what I wanted to do with this webinar. And I really wanted to hear your views. Nobody's got the answer at the moment to what managers should be doing. Do remind yourself, as Anna said, that at the very beginning, you said the job was shit. And at the very end, the second one, you said, it's going to be amazing. Well, something's got to happen to make that happen, because otherwise, in a 6 months' time, it's going to be shit as well. So let me, a couple of things. Firstly, by this afternoon or by tomorrow morning, for those of you on the Barbie already, you'll receive a summary document of this, key insights, copy of the webinar recording, which I'm going to look at really carefully, actually. And also, please do come along to our next webinar, which is on Tuesday, the 27th of April, specifically for our Australian friends. So that's why it's a little bit earlier. What we've done on this one is we've pushed it a bit earlier, so the Australians can actually not yet be drinking their glass of Chardonnay. So on behalf of everybody at HSM, thank you so much for joining us. You'll see in the piece we send you, we'll send you also the video of me talking to Diane. Do take a look at that. Let's keep the conversation going. I've had loads of good ideas. I'm going to get back to some of you about what you've been talking about, and watch this space. You know that I write columns every month, so we'll continue with this. And those of you who haven't joined the Future of Work Consortium, get ahead and join it, because these are exactly the sort of conversations that we're having. So thank you very much. Over to you, Anna. Anything else to add as we close?
No, that's all. Thank you again, everyone, for all your thoughts and comments in the chat. And as Lynda said, we'll be sharing the conversation with Diane and more details today following the webinar.